Hello, my name is James Mandelbaum, Senior Security Engineer with Gigamon. Today we're here to talk about Gigamon basics and deploying V Series on VMware. The agenda is a quick overview of V Series. We're going to talk about the prerequisites before we can deploy it. We're going to install it via the graphical interface, and then we're going to configure the monitoring via the graphical interface. A little bit about the strategy around Gigamon and our cloud services. The V Series solution is intended to be a common framework, no matter if we're talking about virtual machines, containers, service mesh with NSXT, OpenStack. And what we're trying to do is to provide you a single license that covers all of your virtual and cloud environments. For this session, we're here to talk about VMware and virtual machines. Understanding the licensing is really important so that you understand the context of what you can do. Today, there are two flavors. We have CoreVUE and NetVUE. In CoreVUE, that includes flow mapping, header stripping, slicing, masking, and advanced load balancing. For the upgraded license of NetVUE, that includes data deduplication and NetFlow. And you're going to see a whole lot more applications. These features and functions you're seeing are what we call applications coming out in 2021 and going forward into what we can do. If we look backwards, we have traditionally had what we call our GigaVUE VM GV tap. The GV tap was pretty straightforward. It was a tap that installed into your ESX host. It looked at the virtual switches, made copies of it, mirrored the traffic, and sent it off. It was an all or nothing. We either grab everything in that host and send it off to the external tool, or we don't grab anything in that host. What we've realized is people want a better option. So the idea here is with V Series, if we can take that virtual node that installs inside that ESX host and give it more intelligence, give it more capabilities, you can make decisions on what traffic do we send and where do we send it. So think of the same kind of capabilities that you have with our traditional packet brokers, but now we're moving it into the virtual environment. So we have a lot of customers that are moving into the environment where we talk about deploying the V Series nodes into your ESX environments managed by vCenter, and then sending it off to your physical appliances, your physical tools. But you also could do something where if you are truly in a virtual environment, cloud environment, where you don't have physical tools, everything's virtualized, the cool thing about it is that within the V Series, you can actually build a full, think of it as a tap and aggregation model where you can actually create V Series nodes, having them send traffic to other V Series nodes so they can send traffic outbound, accept traffic inbound, and then make decisions on the traffic, and then again, send the appropriate traffic to the appropriate tool, all within the virtual environment and never have to hit the physical environment. Or you can have a mix where some are virtual and some are physical. We're actually going to be focused in this environment for our demo purposes, but it's nothing different to do it, and we'll kind of cover how you do that. From a deployment checklist, we need to make sure we meet the prerequisites. ESXi minimum version 6.7 U2. We will need under 5.10, we need DHCP for the management and tunnel interfaces in the virtual nodes. If we go into version 5.11 or higher, then you have the ability to deploy static IPs on those management and tunnel interfaces. You are required to be running GigaVUE OS 5.10.01 or higher on your appliances that you're going to be communicating and managing from. And then VMware Tools is recommended to be running on the hosts. If we have that, that gives us additional capabilities because now that vCenter can actually see into the host and see its IP address and see information on the host. However, with advanced target selection, we can see every host running in that ESXi managed by vCenter. We can see all of them running, and you can do things like setting tags and manage what gets selected and what doesn't through many different ways. But it's really nice if you have the VMware tools already running. You are required to have Fabric Manager running. We do need you to be running on at least 5.10.01.01. You do need one virtual NIC. It's kind of hard to do it without a NIC. You can't talk to it. From a storage perspective, when we got to 5.10, it did change from being a single 40 gig root. We now have to have an additional 40 gig ephemeral disk attached to Fabric Manager. So it's just 80 gigs. It's pretty small. 4 virtual CPUs, 32 gigs of RAM, and you are required to have a static address assigned to your Fabric Manager. When we start looking at planning this from an infrastructure point of view, you need to have some tunnels planned out. Because as we said, we start looking at sending traffic outbound, where are they going to? If we're accepting traffic inbound, where is it coming from? So when we look at planning this out, you will need to understand how we manage the tunnels VMware to VMware, as well as VMware to tools. And so we're going to show you how you do that. You're going to need to allocate IP addresses for the tunnels. Again, today under 5.10, the IP addresses for the tunnels at the origination are DHCP, but in 5.11, you actually can hard code through static those IP addresses as well. But on both versions, you obviously need to have the destination IP address available. You will need to designate a VM management network, and that's to allow Fabric Manager to talk to the vCenter. And then there's tunnel traffic that has to be done where it's the mirror data, and you need to designate the traffic that's going to flow on. Can it flow on the management network? Of course it can. Some people say, you know what, I have one network, it's all going to traverse it. Great. If you have designated separate networks that you want the mirror traffic to tunnel down, that's fine as well. So you can allocate it or use the same one. From a sizing perspective, as you deploy the VM, you get to choose whether it's small, medium, or large. And that depends upon two things. Are you going to just be taking the traffic, applying some basic filters, and sending it off? Small might be good enough. If you're going to start doing things like NetFlow generation, data duplication, then you might want to start looking at medium or large. It all depends upon how much compute you need based upon the services, the applications that you turn on during the process. So think about what you're going to be doing, size it accordingly. It's not a big deal to remove it and put it back into a larger footprint. Today, there is no way to scale it up, so it would be undeploy, redeploy, but when you see how we do this, you think, what a pain, but it's really not. It's pretty darn simple, and we'll show you as we deploy it. So before we can begin, the first thing we need to do is we need to download the V Series node. So we log into the community page. We click on the More link, and when it pulls down, we select Software and Docs. We'll then go down onto the product filters on the left-hand side. We'll choose GigaVUE VM, and we'll choose the appropriate version. For our demo, we're going to be using 5.10, but of course this does work the same way for 5.11. Now, as we search for the file to download, we're looking for the V Series node, and we want to, of course, grab the latest GA version of it. And in our case, during the time I was doing this, 2.0.1, and we want the OVA version. There are going to be different versions because this same capability, deploying and managing this, is the same exact way for AWS and OpenStack, and I'll be providing videos specific to those environments as well, so look for those in this community page as well as YouTube channel as well. So once we've gone ahead and click on the download link and we accept the terms and conditions, we'll have the file downloaded and then we can begin. Now, once we've got that file ready to go, it's time to deploy. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and log in to Fabric Manager. When we log into Fabric Manager, we are given under 5.10, it looks slightly different than some of the other versions. We've simplified things. We break it down into, we've got sets of dashboards you can modify and create your dashboards. But we break it down into inventory and traffic. Inventory is just that. In our case, they are physical and virtual. So we've got nodes, we've got some of the tools and the topology view. And then from the virtual, these are all the different environments we support. I'm going to go straight into VMware. Now, right off the bat, you're going to say, well, wait, I'm confused. What's the difference? The settings and monitoring domain, this is V Series. The vCenter, NSXT, NSXV, this is the old GigaVUE VM. This is the 1.x. So we're going to go ahead and focus on V Series 2. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into settings, and we need to upload that OVA file. That V Series node gets pushed out to all the different ESX hosts automatically as we deploy, managed by vCenter. So the first thing I need to do is tell Fabric Manager what file we have. So we're going to go ahead and browse the file, and we're going to go ahead and look for the Gigamon GigaVUE V Series node. And there it is, the Gigamon GigaVUE V Series node 2.0.1, which is exactly the one we want. I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and I'm going to upload to server. Once the file is completed uploading, you'll see that it's right here ready to go. We can see the name of the file, it's a V Series node, and its version. Now we're going to come over here and we've got to deal with the tunnel library. So we're going to go ahead and create a new library. We're going to give it a friendly name, and I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to call it VXLAN to tool. So we're going to send a VXLAN tunnel inbound to our tool. And we're going to choose a VXLAN. Now there's a couple things I want to show you. If I choose an ER span, I get inbound only. If I choose L2GRE, you can see I can do inbound and outbound. So when we start looking at architecting and doing our tunneling, if we want to have inbound tunnels where we're going to accept traffic from other V-Series nodes or other services inbound and treat this like an aggregator or a packet broker within our virtual environment, we have the ability to do inbound and outbound through GRE. From VXLAN and ER span, though, they are inbound only. So that's important to understand. So obviously, this isn't going to do what I'm trying to do. So instead of doing a VXLAN, I want to do a GRE to tool. And I want to choose GRE, and I want to do outbound. I'm going to give it the IP address, which has saved for me. And for the most part, everything else I can accept, and I'll say save, and I've now got a tunnel. So far, so good. I've now created the files that are going to be deployed. I've created a tunnel that says how to get it to my tool. I can now create the connection to my monitoring domain. So what I want to do is I want to create a new connection. And so I'll go ahead and just use my name. And it needs an alias. And I will call it vCenter. I need to give it my actual virtual center. So I'll give it the IP address, a username, and the password. Now, if I was going to go ahead and add NSXT, all I have to do is click the slider. And it will allow me to provide the NSXT parameters so I can now connect to NSXT as well. For the purposes of this demo, we're going to keep it simple and we're going to stay straight with the virtual, but it follows the same pattern where I would add the information. So I'm going to say no and click save. Now what's going to happen is it's going to connect to my vCenter and it's going to collect the inventory of what's there. So once it's done collecting the inventory, I can then say, what do I want to manage? What do I want to deploy to? So the first thing I have to do is select the data center. And I'm going to go ahead and select the host. I'm going to select both hosts since I've got two hosts. I'm going to select the image that I uploaded. So far what I'm doing is pretty straightforward. Select the data center that I want to monitor. Select the hosts that I want to monitor as well. These are the two Blade servers that I want to look at. This is the file that I uploaded that I'm going to deploy. The form factor I want to deploy. Now, in my case, I'm going to be tapping the traffic and sending it to an external tool, so a small is fine. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is some common configurations. Now, this is what I'm going to use across the board. Now, you'll notice that data store, it won't let me pick a data store because I don't have common data stores across them. But there are some things that I can do that are common, such as what do I want to call the prefix? Well, it's going to prefix the files, the VMs it deploys, which is this V Series node, with V Series. I can put suffixes on it. It's going to ask me, what do I want to use for the management network? I want to go ahead and just stay with my standard management network, and I want to stay with my standard standard network for my tunnel, but I can absolutely use whatever I want. Then the next thing I have to do is I have to say, what is the gateway IP address that I'm going to send it? So in my case, .1, and I'm going to give it a 24-sided address. Now, when it comes to the disk provisioning, I always recommend using SYN, but if you're looking that you want to do something different, you can. It all depends on how you deploy your VMware. It's going to deploy it here in the root, but if I want to put it somewhere else, I can. And then I've got to create a password, and you can use whatever you want. There is a username called Gigamon that can log into these V Series nodes and do some basic things. You can't do much, but you can go ahead and assign a password. You need to assign a password here and repeat it. And now I'm going to apply to all. Now what that just did is these two hosts down here, that just took everything I just did and copied it down. So now the only thing I need to do here is I need to select where do I want to store this. So that's the first one, and I'm now going to deploy the second one. That's all I need, and I'm going to click deploy. Now, at this point, what it's done is it's connected to my vCenter, and now it says it's going to launch these two V Series nodes. These are the names that it's giving them. And if I go over to my vSphere, you'll see that I'm deploying an OVF, the first one, the 199. And when it gets done deploying this one, it'll go in series. So it's going to deploy the first one. Once this one's deployed, it'll spin it up, and then it'll deploy the next one, it'll spin it up. So if you have a lot of hosts, go have a cup of coffee, go make a phone call, take a break, which is what we're going to do, and we're going to come back and check on this in a few minutes. Now that both of the V Series nodes have been deployed, we can take a look that in instance 1, we have the V Series node, and instance 2, we have the V Series node. One is already spun up. We're now waiting for the other one to spin up. If we go back to Fabric Manager, you'll see there's the reconfiguration of the virtual machine, and it's now being fired up. So if we come back over to Fabric Manager, we'll take a look at what the status is, and it still does show launching. Now, don't worry about how long it takes. Understand that what it's going to do is it first has to deploy them. Once it's deployed, it does a reconfiguration. Remember, we told it which IP addresses we're going to use, which of the virtual switches it's going to use for its tunnel, for its management. So it has to do that reconfiguration. Then it's going to spin them up, and then it's going to apply those changes again once it's up and running. So it will take a few minutes. I know that I, edited this down, but this was actually 15 minutes in my environment to actually get this deployed, and in the video it's only a few seconds. So we'll be patient. We'll wait for them to be powered up. We'll wait for them to come ready. So we'll come back over to Fabric Manager, and we'll wait for the launching status to show good, and it'll come back okay. So we'll be patient. All right, we now have both statuses saying okay, which means now from an inventory purpose, we now have our monitoring domain configured. It's talking to our vCenter, and it's talking to both of our ESX hosts. If we click on any one of them, if we look at the fabric and we click on it, it'll come back and tell us what host it's running on. It'll say that the IP address was assigned via DHCP. It'll show the gateway address. It'll show everything about the V Series node, how we configured it. So we can get some basic information on it by taking a look at it. When we look at the domain itself, we can show what credentials were used. Once we've gone ahead and done the physical portion of it, which in our case it's really virtual, but it's a physical connection, the inventory is done, we can now start looking at how do we gather the traffic. So if we come over to the traffic side, and again we're looking at the virtual environment, and we go into the orchestrated flows, the virtual maps is our GigaVUE VM. If we go into the orchestrated flows and go into VM, we need to actually now create a new monitoring session. So I'm going to create a session. I'm going to give it a name, and I'll call it just my name. And the monitoring domain will select, of course, my name. Now we're going to select the connection, which is the vCenter. We only have one vCenter here. If I had multiple vCenters, I could select it. If I have different monitoring domains, this gives you the ability, you can see that you can scale this. So I can create sessions for specific hosts, specific vCenters, and then the idea again is I can create different flows and different policies based upon how I want my tunnels to look. If I'm going to, in my case, grab everything, send it off to a tool or a destination, in my case is actually going to be an HC1, physical hardware, then I can send it off to all of my physical tools, but it doesn't mean you can't send it to your virtuals directly. So I'm going to go ahead and create it. Now I get the really nice graphical drag and drop environment. Before I do anything, I want to take a look at the targets. Now what it's using is automatic target selection. So I can expand these out and take a look at the networks that I'm looking at, and I can look at the different hosts that it sees, and I can see everything that vCenter is managing. Now I don't have a really large network over here that I'm monitoring. I can see that I've got some hosts that are talking on different multiple networks. But the idea is if it is dark in color, dark orange, that means it is going to pass the traffic. If it's grayed out, that means it's not going to be part of the target selection. So I'm going to go ahead and, oops, I'm sorry, let me bring it back up and shrink it back down so it's down here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new monitoring session. So all I have to do is I'll come over here and drag this map onto the canvas. And it says, okay, what do I want to do? So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to create a pass all. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab everything. And I'm going to give it a priority of 1, and I'm going to add a rule. You have to have a rule. And in my case, I'm going to say I want to grab everything that's IP version 4. Pretty straightforward. So just like you do in your regular traditional maps, if you haven't watched how to build maps, there's another video I did where I show you how to build maps. You can create rules and policies. You can create a lot of rules and determine, just like you can with firewalls, all the different types of things that you want to grab. In my case, I'm doing a pass all for IPv4. I can add additionals where I can say, okay, and then I want to add another rule, and I've got different kinds of things I can do here, different host names. I can look at destinations. I can look at sources. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and say, grab everything that's v4. So I'm going to click Save. And you can see I've now got a pass all. Now what I want to do is I've got a tunnel, which is my GRE tunnel. So I'm going to grab that. And if I look at my tunnel and look at details, it shows that it's going GRE to the tool. It's got a tunnel ID, the tunnel type, where it's going outbound, where it's going to, and the settings. And this is everything I created the tunnel. So as I create tunnels, they will show up in my tunnel inventory. Now, if I wanted to, I could just come over here and I can just drag an arrow and say, okay, I'm done. Just do a pass all, send it to the tunnel. Now, that's as simple as I do. That's all it takes. But in my case, I want to enable some of the capabilities. So when we look at the applications, this is what I'm licensed for. I have slicing, masking, and data deduplication. So I want to go ahead and use data deduplication. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a line from here to dedupe and from dedupe over to the GRE. And that's all it takes. I'm going straight from, I'm going to grab all my IPv4, pass it through my data deduplication, and then send it off GRE to my tool. Now, how do I configure it? Click on details, and up comes the information. There's my dedupe application. I'm going to drop when it sees it. I'm going to include all the parameters. I'm going to ignore VLANs, and here is my window, my timer window, and I'm good to go. And I am all set. And then to deploy this is nothing but click deploy. Now you can see it's deploying. Deploying doesn't take very long because all deploying is doing is, remember how I said that it uses the management interfaces to just talk to it and reconfigure as it goes. So changing the deployment doesn't have to respin up, doesn't have to make changes to anything other than the configs. So think of it as firewall rules that are getting dynamically changed. So at this point, I can click on the success window and I can look at the status. It'll tell me the monitoring session. It'll tell me everything about it. I can see the targets that are selected. If I look at them, it'll show me what I'm seeing. So I've got a threat insight sensor. I've got a vCenter. I've got Infection Monkey, and I've got a Windows Server 2016 and the IP addresses of these boxes. Now you'll notice these have IP addresses. This one doesn't because these have VMware tools loaded. This does not have VMware tools loaded on it. You'll see that I've got two V Series nodes. Again, I can click on it. It'll show me the different boxes. And that's all it takes. Now I am fully deployed. And if I come in and look for statistics, and if I look by the hour, it's too new. I've just deployed it. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this on pause, and in a couple seconds, I'm going to come back, and we're going to take a look at what the statistics look like. As you can see, we start seeing traffic flowing, and as it populates and they start getting more active, you'll start seeing inbound, outbound, depending upon how your architecture is. If you come into the counters, you can make decisions on whether you want to look at bytes per second or if you want to look at packets per second. So if I wanted to change this to packets, I could change it and I would see it. And if you also look at it, I've got incoming packets, I've got outgoing, and then I've got a ratio going. So all of these, again, highlightable, and you can do that. Now, one thing that I do want to make sure that we cover is that when I built this fabric, and I went ahead, I'm going to go ahead and edit it. And we took and I said, I just want to do a pass all. And I grabbed everything. But what if I said I wanted to exclude something? So if I come in here and I look at my targets and I say, look, I don't really want the vCenter traffic being captured. How do I exclude that? The easiest way is to expand this bottom part right here. And you can see I can create inclusion or exclusion maps. So in the context I'm talking about is I want to include or exclude. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and create a new map. And in here I can actually say that I want to do exclusions. I'm going to go ahead and give it a priority of 1, add a rule. Now in my case, I'm looking for a host name. And in my host name, it's going to be vCenter. And I can use a wildcard. And I can say save. And then what happens is when I deploy this, then this will be excluded and I'm good to go. And in deploying it is nothing more than saying, clicking again, deploy. It'll come back, and that's all it takes. Deployment is instantaneous. This slide shows the flows and the tunnel ports and the firewall rules that are required to make everything happen. This is one of the things I didn't cover in detail, and it is in the documentation. So feel free to grab a screenshot of this. And the ports don't change, but some of the capabilities, when you move up to 5.11, things get a little better because we have static IPs in there. But for demo purposes, I decided to go with 5.10 because more people are moving to 5.10 since it's the next version for them instead of the latest and greatest, which is 5.11. Be sure to come back to community.gigamon.com. You can see more videos. You can get all the downloads. You can get all the documentation. And please follow me on Twitter. Thank you very much.